Hello viewers, welcome to my channel. I'm Hasham. Now I'm going to start a very important topic, that is residential status. So income tax is applied on the SSCs according to the residential status. In examination you may get a theory question regarding what are the provisions regarding the determination of residential status of an SSC. So this video is very important, and there are no changes from the assessment year 22-23 and 23-24. Same provisions will apply. So you can watch the video completely till the end on this residential status. Now, the scope of total income depends on the residential status of a person, what incomes are to be included and what incomes are to be excluded. Every income is not taxable. So it depends on the residential status. If the residential status of a person is resident in India, then he is liable to pay tax on his global income. That means wherever he has earned the income throughout the world, he has to pay the tax in India if his residential status is ordinarily resident in India. Then if on the other hand, if the residential status is a non-resident, that means if the SSC is a non-resident, he has to pay the tax only on the Indian income. He is not liable to pay tax on the income earned in foreign country. So ultimately, the tax depends on the residential status. The citizenship of a person does not have any relationship with residential status. That means citizenship will be determined by the constitution, whereas residential status is determined according to the provisions of Income Tax Act. So even a foreigner has also to pay the tax in India. That means nothing has to be done regarding citizenship. Now section 6 of the Income Tax Act 1961 deals with contains the provisions of determining the residential status of different types of persons. So for determining the residential status, the persons are classified into individual, then HUF, firms or association of persons, companies, every other person, LLP, limited liability partnership. So Income Tax Act has given strict provisions regarding how to determine the residential status of an individual, HUF, like that. In this video, I am going to explain you about how to determine the residential status of individual only. Whereas for other persons, next video I am going to explain you in detail regarding how to determine the residential status of HUF, firms, companies, every other person, LLP, right? So for determining the residential status of individual, we have three types of individuals. The first type of individual, resident and ordinarily resident. Second, resident but not ordinarily resident. And third one is non-resident. So how to find out that? In this video, I have explained in detail how to determine the residential status of individuals. How to determine the residential status? Very often in examination they will ask what are the provisions under Income Tax Act regarding residential status. So before explaining in detail, take the screenshot of the points which I have written on the board. Come on, now I am going to start. The income earned in the previous year is assessed to tax in the respective assessment year. Therefore, residential status for the previous is the prime factor in levying the tax. So what it says, the income tax is levied on the income earned in the previous year and assessed to tax in the assessment year based on the residential status of the SSC during the previous year. So in other words, we can say the income tax liability depends on the residential status of the SSC during the previous year. The residential status may change as the person will move from one country to another country. So his status will not remain same every year. We have to determine what is the residential status, accordingly tax liability will be applied. So this residential status determination is very important as it affects the tax liability of the person. The term residential status is a technical term and it is determined for deciding the tax liability of a person. Now remember, Income Tax Act has nothing to do with the citizenship. The citizenship of a person will be decided by the Constitution. But Income Tax Act will decide about the residential status of the person on which the tax liability will depend. So it is compulsory. Before calculating the tax liability, we have to determine what is the status, what's the residential status. Section 6 of the Income Tax Act 1961 contains the provisions for determining the residential status of different types of persons. We have different types of persons under Income Tax Act, like individual, HUF, Hindu undivided family, partnership firm, joint stock company, etc. So different provisions are there regarding the residential status of individual, HUF, firm. All these provisions are contained under Section 6 of the Income Tax Act. Under the law, every person is deemed to be a resident and ordinary resident unless and until he proves his residential status to be otherwise. If nothing is given, if no information is provided, then it is assumed that every assessee is resident and ordinarily resident in India until and unless he proves otherwise. The assessee has to prove that I am not a resident, I am not an ordinary resident. He has to prove. But the law makes an assumption that every person is a resident and ordinarily resident. Then for determining the residential status, the term person has been classified. Income Tax Act has given different provisions for determining the residential status of different persons. So who are the persons for determining the residential status? Individual is a person. Hindu undivided family is a person. Firms or association of persons is a person. Companies is also a person. Every other person. So broadly 5 categories are there. Now to determine the residential status for each type of person, a separate set of rules are given by the Income Tax Act. So how to determine the residential status of an individual? Complete set of rules are given by the Income Tax Act. Similarly, how to find out the residential status of HUF? Again, different provisions are given. So all provisions are contained in Section 6 of the Income Tax Act 1961, and those provisions I am going to explain you in detail. Always keep a pen, notebook beside you and write it down the important points. Now, first of all, we are discussing about the residential status of an individual. How to find out the residential status of an individual? The residential status of a person whose status is an individual can be of 3 types. First of all, law says an individual may be resident and ordinarily resident. First one. Second one, resident but not ordinarily resident. And third one, non-resident. These 3 categories of individuals we have for determining the residential status. For determining the residential status of an individual, there are 2 sets of conditions. Remember again, all these things what I am explaining you should write in examination, in theory if it is asking. So for determining the residential status of an individual, 2 sets of conditions. The first set of condition is basic condition. Second one, additional conditions. These 2 conditions have been given by Income Tax Act. Now we have to check whether conditions are satisfied by the individual or not. Then only we can say whether he is resident and ordinary resident, or resident but not ordinary resident, or non-resident. Now, under basic and additional condition, 2 sets of rules are there. That means 2 rules are there in basic condition and 2 rules are there in additional conditions. And all these rules have to be satisfied by the individual. Step 1. First step. First, determine whether a person satisfies basic condition or not. 2 sets of conditions are there, basic and additional. First, we have to check basic condition. So, step number 1, we have to determine whether the individual SSC is satisfying the basic conditions or not. How many rules are there in basic condition? 2 rules. If he satisfies one or both of the basic condition, then he will be considered as resident. If a person fails to satisfy any of the 2 basic conditions, then he will be treated as non-resident. Very important provision. Basic conditions are 2. So first we have to check whether basic conditions are satisfied or not. If the SSC satisfies one or both the basic conditions, then he will be treated as resident. He will be treated as resident. If a person does not satisfy any condition, neither first rule nor second rule, both the rules of basic condition, the SSC is not satisfying, then the SSC will be called non-resident. Right? This is the first step. Second, if the status of the person is resident, that means the person has satisfies the first basic condition or both the basic conditions, then we can say the person is a resident person. After finding out that he is a resident, we have to check whether he is ordinal resident or not ordinal resident. For that purpose, additional conditions are given. If the status of the person is resident, then only apply the test of additional condition. If an SSC is a non-resident, then test of additional conditions are not to be applied. Very clear rule is given. The additional conditions are applied only for resident. If the person is a non-resident, additional conditions are not applicable. That rule you have to remember. Now, if the individual satisfies both the additional condition, then he will be treated as resident and ordinarily resident. See, first of all, the SSC has satisfied either one or both the basic condition. He has become resident. He has become resident. Now we have testing the additional condition. If the SSC satisfies both the additional conditions, 2 additional conditions are there, and both the additional conditions he is satisfied, then his status will be resident and ordinarily resident. That means he has satisfied the basic conditions, he has satisfied the additional conditions, so his status is resident and ordinary resident. Now secondly, if an individual satisfies any one of 2 or none of the 2 conditions, then he will be considered as a resident but not ordinary resident. See, if an SSC satisfies the basic condition, he is a resident. Now we are checking the additional condition. Additional condition, here satisfies any one of the additional condition or none of the additional condition. Then we treat that person as a resident but not ordinal resident, because he cannot satisfy both the additional conditions. Both the additional conditions must be satisfied, then only he will become a resident and ordinarily resident. That's it. Now, what are the basic conditions? So far we have discussed that 2 basic conditions are there and 2 additional conditions are there. What are the basic conditions and what are the additional conditions? Now I am going to explain. This is very important. Basic condition. The first basic condition say he is in India in the relevant previous year for a minimum period of 182 days. Very important. First basic condition. During the current previous year, the SSC must stay in India. Must stay in India for a minimum period of 182 days. Year consists of 365 days. So in the whole year, minimum 182 days he should stay in India. First basic condition. Second basic condition, he is in India for a period of 60 days or more during the relevant previous year and 365 days or more during 4 years preceding the relevant previous year. If the first condition is not satisfied, then we have to check the second condition. Because if any one of the basic condition is satisfied, then he will become resident. He will become resident. So if first condition is not satisfied, we have to check the second condition. The second condition says he must stay in India for a minimum period of 60 days. during the relevant previous year and 365 days or more during 4 years preceding the relevant previous year. Before this relevant previous year, in those 4 years, he must stay in India for 365 days. So two conditions are attached in this second one. The first condition says he must stay in India for a minimum period of 60 days during the current previous year and 365 days or more during 4 years preceding the current previous year. Right? So these two are the basic conditions. If an SSC satisfies any one of the condition or both the conditions, he will become resident. If a person does not satisfy any of the basic conditions, he will become a non-resident. If he become a non-resident, no need to check the additional. Additional conditions are there only for resident SSCs. Now, additional condition. The first additional condition says he has been resident in India for 2 out of 10 previous years preceding the relevant previous year. That means the first additional condition says the SSC must be resident in at least 2 out of 10 previous years preceding the current previous year. Our current previous year is 2021-22. Assessment year is 22-23. For the assessment year 22-23, previous year is 21-22. So before this 21-22, 10 years. In those 10 years, at least 2 years, he must be resident in India. That is the first additional condition. Second additional condition says he has been in India for a period of 730 days or more during the past 7 years preceding to the relevant previous year. Second condition says he must stay in India for a minimum period of 730 days. He must stay in India for 730 days or more during 7 years preceding the current previous year. Before the current previous year, our current previous year is 21-22. Before 21-22, 7 years you go back. In those 7 years, he should stay in India for a minimum period of 730 days. This is the second. So, if a person satisfies any one of the basic condition, he will become a resident. Now we have to check the additional. If he satisfies both the additional condition, he will be called resident and ordinarily resident. If a person does not satisfy any of the additional condition or he satisfies one additional condition, he will be known as resident but not ordinary resident. That's it. These are the provisions regarding determination of residential status of individual. Now, note, if an individual satisfies both the additional conditions, then he will be treated as resident and ordinary resident. When the SSC satisfies both the additional condition, then only he will be called as resident and ordinary resident. If an individual satisfies any one of the two or none of the additional condition, then he will be considered as resident but not ordinary resident. That's it. Now, special category. These are the general rules. These basic conditions and additional conditions, what I explained, are the general rules. One special category of persons are there on which basic condition is applied only first one. The second basic condition is not applicable for special category of persons. Who are the special category of persons? The following 3 situations, the provisions of special category are to be applied. 3 cases are there. In those 3 cases, only the first basic condition is applicable, second basic condition is not applicable. Now, an Indian citizen left to the foreign country. Many Indian citizens will leave India to foreign country for employment purpose, for job purpose. So for those people, for those Indian citizens who are leaving India to a foreign country for doing a job or employment basis, for them only first condition is applicable. That person is resident in India only if he satisfies the first basic condition. His stay in India should be 182 days or more. then only he will be treated as resident. If he stays less than 182 days, he will be called as non-resident for these people. So, in case of an individual who is citizen of India and leaving the country during the relevant previous year for employment outside India, and they will be considered as resident if he satisfies, if he stay in India during the previous year relevant to the current assessment year 182 days or more. So, during the previous year, the person is leaving India. So, during the previous year, if he stay for 182 days or more, then he will be treated as resident. If he stay for less than 182 days, we will treat that person as a non-resident. Finished. Once he becomes non-resident, no need of additional condition. First case. Second case, an Indian citizen or a person of Indian origin came to India. There are many people, many Indian citizens who are working abroad, and during a period of time they will come to India on a visit. After spending here 1, 2, 3, 4 months, they will again go back to foreign country for earning, for employment basis. For them, if they stay in India during the period, during the visit for 182 days or more, then only he will be treated as resident. If his visit in India is less than 182 days and then he goes outside India, he will be treated as non-resident. So here, in case of an individual who is citizen of India or Indian origin, who has been outside India, comes on a visit to India for a minimum period of 182 days during the relevant previous year, and his total income is up to 15 lakh rupees. One more condition is given for these people. If his total income exceeds, up to 15 lakh. His total income is up to 15 lakh. Then only he will be treated as a resident. If these conditions are not satisfied, then he will be treated as non-resident. So if an individual is not satisfying the above said condition, then he will be treated as non-resident. Two conditions are over. Third special category is citizen of India who left as crew in the ship. The staff members of the ship is called crew. So the crew people, the provisions regarding residential status are: an individual being a citizen of India left India during the previous year as a member crew, staff member on duty, stayed in India for a minimum period of 182 days, will be treated as resident. For these crew people also, during the previous year, if they stay in India for 182 days or more, then only they will be treated as resident. If their stay in India is less than 182 days, they will be treated as non-resident. That's all. So these are the provisions regarding residential status of an individual. Still, we have to discuss about how to determine the residential status of Hindu undivided family, firms, companies, and every other person. In the next video, inshallah, I will discuss how to calculate, how to find out the residential status of other persons other than individuals. So if you are satisfied, give a like to the video, share my channel, give your comments on these videos, subscribe my channel if you have not yet subscribed, and buy the super thanks which is given below my video. Inshallah, we will continue in the next video.